Just put your money in these mutual funds, set and forget it. Just lock it away in that prison. And then eventually down the road, you'll unlock that prison door and you can finally live cheap like every other, retired person on a budget.
Barely
right?
getting by, yeah.
Yeah.
They are barely getting by.
Doesn't have to be the case. And I've had so many people that have retired early, or even better yet, we don't even talk about retirement because we really would talk about becoming work optional, right? Where you have enough passive income coming in that you now work by choice, not by survival. You can have more enough passive income to pay all of your bills. And that's where you work because you want to, not because you have to.
Welcome to the Super Clinic Project Podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and turn them into cash-based multimillionaire entrepreneurs. Warning, if you're a doctor who listens to this podcast regularly, you will make millions of dollars. Do not listen to this podcast unless you want to be a successful clinic owner who helps thousands of patients achieve their health goals and adds more money than you can imagine to your bank account. You've been warned.
Welcome to the Super Clinic Project Podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and we turn them into super clinic owners. I'm Jennifer Gligoric. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm here today with our guest, who is a cash flow expert and an anti-financial advisor. He's an author, host of the Money Ripples podcast. He's been featured in U.S. News, CNN Money, Entrepreneurs on Fire, Bigger Pockets, and he's increased his clients' cash flow by $300 million in the last 13 years. So let us welcome the incredible Chris Miles to the show today. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. So excited to be here. What can I say?
I know, I'm excited to have you. And I have actually interviewed you on several other podcasts. So I was so happy to get to talk to you again, because I feel when I met you, of course, pre-COVID, like well before COVID. So when we first started talking, it was like, oh, remember that financial crash in real estate in the 2008? Like we were still, talking about how we recovered from that. And now it's like such a different world. So much has changed, and I'm glad to be able to catch up to you. But I want you to start off by explaining to the audience what you mean by anti-financial advisor, so we can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, it means that pretty much whatever you hear from financial advisors is probably crap. and not intentionally. It's not like they're trying to intentionally hurt you, but I learned firsthand because I started out my entrepreneur journey as a financial advisor. I had done that in the early 2000s, right after 9/11. And after 4 years of being in that business, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was convinced that everybody needed to save everything, spend nothing, save it forever, put it away, and hopefully someday you'll have something. And then I sat down with my dad, who was the epitome of being the penny pinching saver, right? He was post-era depression, He was also a guy that was he would say frugal. We all said cheap, right? The guy was the cheapest son of a gun you've ever met. Always said he couldn't afford anything. What do you think I am? Made of money doesn't grow on trees, all that kind of stuff. And so after 4 years of me being in the business, he reached out. He says, well, Chris, are you going to advise me at some point? And so eventually I sat down with him and I looked at his finances for the first time in my entire life, because he was always so guarded that everybody was going to try to take his money.
Right.
And so I look at his finances, and he was cheap, right? The guy had paid off all of his debt, including his house. So he was 100% debt free. He'd been stuffing money in his 401k, getting the company match like every good boy and good girl should. And then I had to tell him, I said, Dad, you're 61 years old. If you try to retire today, your hope is to die in about 5 or 6 years, because that's when you're going to run out of money. I said, all right, well,
that
what
is
do I
not
do?
a conversation we want to have with our parents, right? That's heartbreaking too. It's heartbreaking when you see someone who's literally sacrificed an entire life and forgone things that they probably really wanted. Maybe a trip that he really, really wanted to do, or maybe if he was into sports, some event that he really wanted to go to, and he thought, no, I'll just do it later. I need to save right now, only to find out that no, all that sacrifice, it could have been different. So how did that end up?
Yeah, well, he wanted answers, and I just told him the same thing a financial advisor would probably say, which is save more and just retire later. And he did. He actually worked into his 70s. He is now 81 years old, still alive today, even though he thought he would die from some widowmaker heart attack or something like that. He didn't. And so now he's stretching out every dollar he possibly can between Social Security, all the other assets he has. He's now thinking, well, maybe I need to do a reverse mortgage on my house or sell off everything just to try to pay for the home health care that he has, right? And that's the sad but all too common story that we're finding out there today, right? Isn't it? I mean, there's so many people out there that are living on just such a tight budget that have to work longer than they thought. I mean, I just saw a video from a financial advisor the other day, a video that had 1.3 million views talking about if you want to retire early at age 62, here's what you do. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like 62 is now considered early retirement. And that's the truth. It is, because so many people have to keep working.
It
And
used to
so
be
I was,
50 was early because 55 was considered the time to retire, which
yeah,
is
wasn't it?
really,
And
it's
not
really
anymore.
ridiculous that, and then, and this has a real big trickle down effect if we don't think about our money, if we don't push back against these systems, because we needed grandparents, or people in their 50s and 55 to start to be able to retire. We need them as children, right? Because
Yeah,
grandparents are an incredible bonus to a family. They can help with kids, they can help do things. You get, and when that doesn't happen, then that entire system in societal support is gone.
hmm,
Now you are seeing, well, we don't have the support that we had in families, and so it isn't that the kids are bad or or the grandparents are bad. It's just like, well, it's not set up for that anymore. I can't be, Bubba, who's there always making the things and helping you kids out so that you can afford the house because I'm taking this health care and we can have some generational wealth. Well, when you take that off the table and you take away the grandparents, then you have struggle or you just have collapse because we're not going to be having those kids, right? Because
that's
there's no
right.
one there. So this has so many more issues than, oh well, those mean boomers who ruined everything for everyone, right?
Yeah,
That is what the media has literally force fed into younger generations, that you should really hate the elders. You shouldn't
yeah,
care if they're having to work harder and longer. That's their fault. They did all
hmm,
this bad stuff, right? And that's just not
right.
true. That's a lie, right?
That's
And
right.
it's
It
going to
really
come
is.
for you too. So if we don't fix it, then we're in a whole mess of goods. But you're in the career of fixing that, right?
That's
So
right.
talk about how you're doing that, how you're getting creative for yourself, so that you can, of course, help family like your dad and your clients.
Yeah, I mean, after that experience, I started looking for answers, right? Because I
Yeah.
didn't have any in the financial advisor world. And I started finding out that I started looking for evidence. Like, where are people actually truly making money? And even better, how about this whole passive income that Robert Kiyosaki talks about in Rich Dad Poor Dad? How does that happen? Because most time people read that book, they say, "Oh, I'm going to have to start a brand new business, become a business owner." They talk about becoming an investor, but they don't know how to do it because he doesn't really give you the answers. And so when I started searching, I started finding ways I could actually passively, like hands off, invest in things like real estate. I'm not talking about REITs, a real estate investment trust that people talk about in the mutual fund world. No, in fact, those suck. They're usually pretty bad. And so, no, I actually go into the real Main Street investing versus Wall Street investing. And that's where I become like the anti financial advisor, right? Because I started to find out, I was like, wait a minute, I could literally lend my money to a real estate investor and make 1% a month. I could have $100,000, it'll pay me $1,000 a month. That's not possible in the financial advisor world, right? Because the truth is that, people talk about the 4% rule, right? You can live on 4% a year in your retirement. However, that's only true if you retire at 70. That number has changed. It's 3% rule now if you're trying to retire around 60. So if you think about it, if I had that same $100,000, 3% is $3,000 a year. That's nothing, right? Even if I had $1 million, that's 30,000 a year in the traditional financial advisor world. But if I had that same $1 million, in fact, I had a client who did this where he had $1 million saved up in his retirement account from working in the military for so many years. And then he talked to his advisor. The advisor says 30,000 a year. He says, I live in California. Broke people, homeless people live on 30,000 a year. What do I do? And so he eventually found our podcast. And when he started to work with it and strategize, we said, hey, let's find ways to diversify in these alternative investments, right? Things outside of what your financial advisor offers. So, for example, there was a few duplexes he bought, but he's not the one that's the property manager because most of us stink at being a property manager.
There's
So
a
no,
lot
he
of
has,
rules, and I've
Yeah.
seen, and on Bigger Pockets, I've been on Bigger Pockets, but I've seen like the legal issue on Bigger Pockets. Like, for example, someone became a real estate investor. They had two houses that they had to get out of. They couldn't afford it anymore. They were in
Yeah.
California, and they decided that these two were gonna rent an apartment, and these two houses that we were able to have in two different areas.
Mhm.
We're gonna rent those, and then they did insane things. Like they demanded to they said we have to be able to inspect the property, and they would just show up unannounced, like literally every other month. And they
Yeah.
ended up showing up unannounced, demanding that they had access, that supposedly someone told them there were rats. This is my house. How dare you? The lady is there with the baby, just got out of the hospital. She's like, I don't feel comfortable with you in here. No, he muscled his way into the house. Oh, I'm going to see what's happening. Oh, you should clean up. And just, she became hysterical, right? She's
Wow.
hormonal, whatever, just had a baby. And he ended up in the worst lawsuit because he had violated the contract. That wasn't his house anymore. That was
Uh-huh.
her house. She had a contract, and he needed to schedule that. The law says you have to give him 30 days notice. There has to be a reason, and you cannot do that every other month. You're allowed
That's
to do
right.
it like annually in the law. Blew past all that, and of course lost their shirts. They lost the houses, right?
Yeah.
And so if
That's
you
it.
don't have a good thing now that's an extreme case, but there's
Mhm.
lots of little laws and things like that that could get you sued. You want an experienced property manager.
That's right. And that's the only way to be hands off, right? Because so many people
Right.
think, oh, I'm just going to save a few bucks. I'm going to do it all myself. But then you create another job for yourself. Where's the freedom? Where's the time freedom they always talk about? And you just don't have it. I've talked to so many real estate investors that are actively doing it. And they're like, listen, if I'm not, I'm spending all my time doing this stuff. And you don't have to, right? That's why a good property manager's in place. So he got a couple duplexes that paid some good rent. He also invested in some oil and gas investments that paid off in that partnership. He also had, like apartment, type of ownership as well. So he wasn't the one going all in, but he got in with other partners to be able to get an apartment. And after all was said and done, that $1 million, instead of paying him 30,000 a year, like his financial advisor was suggesting, it was now paying him 13,000 a month, well over 130, 140,000 a year, right? Actually, it's closer to about 150 or so, or 160,000 a year. But either way, who's counting? I guess he
Yeah, it's
was.
not 30,000. I mean, that's a big difference, right?
Yeah, it's at least 100,000 more a year, same money, just done better. And that's really what we've been helping people do is open up to this whole other world. Almost have to take this matrix red pill to find it, because financial advisors don't get paid to recommend it, which is why they don't do it. Or like me, I didn't even know the world existed. I knew about people would buy real estate properties like you talked about, but I always share those horror stories and saying, you know what, stock market's better. Just put your money in these mutual funds, set and forget it, just lock it away in that prison, and then eventually down the road you'll unlock that prison door and you can finally live cheap like every other retired person on a budget, right?
Barely getting by, yeah.
Yeah,
They are
that's
barely
just
getting
doesn't
by.
have to be the case. And I've had so many people that have retired early, or even better yet, we don't even talk about retirement because we really would talk about becoming work optional, right? Where you have enough passive income coming in that you now work by choice, not by survival. You can have more enough passive income to pay all of your bills, and that's where you work because you want to, not because you have to. Because my experience, many people still want to do something. They still want to keep active. They might even still want to keep doing their business or their want to keep doing their clinic, right, or their jobs. But they just want to do it on their own terms. Maybe they say, I want to just work in my my practice like 2 or 3 days a week. Great, do it. Hey, I want to take a month off. Great, now you can do it. You don't need to show up, because unfortunately, what happens to so many business owners is that they feel like they're stuck. They feel like if they take a week or two off, yeah, sure, they make great income, and on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, their life looks perfect. But in the back of their minds, they're always thinking, yeah, but if I don't show up, I'm not making money. And if I'm
Right, the
not
whole
making
thing
money,
goes down.
yeah, that's right. And
Mm.
so you can really break free of that, to create not just financial freedom, but true time freedom, where you don't feel guilty or you feel stressed because you took that time away to be with your family, who you should be with anyways, but then keep doing what you love too.
Yeah. And real estate can be volatile, but I'm going to tell you, when you talk about multifamily or duplexes and you talk about reasonable rent increases, there are definitely ways to do that ethically and morally. I know that and I'm glad we're having those discussions.
Yeah,
We need to want to be ethical investors, right? And we want to be morally good people that give people an option to have a clean, safe roof over the head, but at the same time, we're helping them and they're helping us. And as long as you have that mindset and you ask the right questions and you get a good partner to help you, then your investment can make you feel good at the same time, because
that's right.
we don't want to, there's a lot, because people will say, and I think one of your questions that you answer a lot, Chris, is what the heck's going on with the market? What about these people, and stuff like that, or these horror stories that happened during COVID, this once in a world crushing event, right? That
Yeah,
has scared a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that good moral ethical investing is not happening. It's happening right now. There are still lots of chances for it to happen to you. You just need to get with the right people and the right team. But now
yeah.
that I said that, what the heck is going on with the market?
You bring up a good point that not many people do bring up because you talk about being more moral and ethical, right?
Mhm.
And think about it right now in the market today. They're talking about so many articles and everything are out there talking about how millennials and Gen Z can't even afford to buy a home anymore, especially with the interest rates have gone higher. You're providing a service by providing a place for them to rent where they don't have to come out of pocket with this large down payment and have this massive payment to go with it on top of it, right? You're really giving them a leg up, and helping them to be able to do it. And honestly, some in that generation don't even care to own a property. So you are creating a win-win service for people. You don't have to be as people, so, they've kind of, you see it in movies and TV shows and things like that, where it's like these just horrible landlords. Like you don't have to be that
Yeah.
slumlord or whatever, that's not the case at all. It's very much you're providing a service.
I talked to
Now,
somebody who is really interesting, and what he did is he was literally Gen Z. He had no money, and he decided, but because the market and the lending market, and this is still true, is positive for investors, he found a triplex, and he
yeah,
actually what he did is he got that, and then he two of the units were already rented, and then his unit. Now this is where it gets sketch and hilarious. So
hmm,
his unit, he actually built him a little room out of cardboard. I'm not even kidding. He's been on Bigger Pockets, and I forget his name now, but he made a book about it, like my cardboard Airbnb business. But that's what he did. He actually Airbnb'd out the one bedroom in his apartment complex. And he said, this is it. It's not sketch. I'm saving money, but I'm super cool. I'll take you to all the cool places and
hmm,
I'll give you all the cool stuff. And he made it cheap enough just to cover his rent.
yeah,
And he was able to Airbnb that because he lived in a place there was a university there was a hospital there, and then they had like some events that happened. He said between business or university and that, he did advertise it, but he said he broke even. So he did not
hmm,
have to pay rent. And he goes, and he just saved. He said, I was able to do it because I was single at the time, and this is what I was able to do. But he saved and made the money, was able to pay off that debt and get
hmm,
another property. And then that one had two complexes on it. And I forget, but he ended up basically springboarding that to where, okay, now I had an apartment. I didn't have to do the room anymore. And
yeah,
now he was able to get a house. But that was his plan. And he was able
yeah,
to utilize the laws and the interesting taxing laws that went along with that. There are things that you can do if you have that property. You can be able to exit that if you have a plan. So he just utilized this plan that he had read about, and the banker said, yeah, you can do that, which you saved on. There's interest in taxes, and he was able to do that within like 3 years
yeah,
by going springboard. And I don't have all the laws to it, but yeah, there's still ways
yeah,
to do that. So I would tell, if you are Gen Z and millennial and you're out of school, well, of course you're a millennial, you're off in the workplace now. But if you're like, hey, I'm struggling, there's a lot of things that you guys can do. You could get a duplex, there's townhome things. and if you already have your clinic too, they're more than willing to do that. And then you don't have to, that would cut off your rent payment for that month.
Yeah, and just think about how creative and profitable that is, and still provides a service, right? It
Yeah.
really is a win-win transaction. Now, contrast that with what you're doing in the stock market or mutual funds right now. Can you
Mhm.
guarantee that every single company that you have money invested in whatever tiny fraction of percentage that you have, that you trust that that company's got good values, that they're doing something good? You can't do that. You don't
Mhm.
know. You don't know where you're investing. You just throw it in. If you buy the S&P 500 index, which is like the most popular thing people are moving to right now, it's all everybody on social media is telling you, go buy that spider fund, right? Do you even know what you're investing in? Do you even know
No.
who you're investing with? No, you don't know. You hear about Tesla, you hear about Meta and Google and all that kind of crap. The big, magnificent seven,
And
the
people
Mag
invest
Seven.
with that all the time, and that guy's nuts, right? And I like him. I'm not like mad at him. I'm not going to go blow up any Teslas or do anything crazy like that.
Hmm.
But he's still odd. He's
Hmm.
an odd duck, right? At least with this, you can do it more, I think,
Yeah.
more ethically, and also to make more of an actual impact, right? That
Yeah.
isn't going to
If you're
billionaires.
like an environmentalist and you got oil and gas stocks in there, why are you doing that? Like I thought that was destroying the earth. Why are you investing with them then? Like why are you doing stuff that violates it? So that's the thing. There's all those weird little aspects happening, but let's talk about the market, what's going on now, like you had asked, right? Because it is interesting. Many people still bring up the last global financial crisis. They think, yeah, but real estate too high, it's going to crash. Now, I don't disagree in the sense that I don't think you'll see prices skyrocket in real estate, especially like they were doing the last 5 years. You won't see
Oh
that
yeah.
happen, in my opinion. I could be wrong. However, that being said, it's still one of the safest places to keep your money. Because let's look at evidence, right? How When you look at people and where they've put money, who have become the most accidental millionaires you've ever found, right? People that had no clue they even became millionaires, and it's not because they were geniuses. It's people that bought real estate and held on to it for a long time. I mean, you
Mhm.
think about people in California. I mean, how many times have you heard the story of somebody buying a property in California in 1992 and for 150,000 and now it's worth 3 million, right? They didn't do anything to do that. They just literally made money. And the crazy thing is when they bought that house for 150,000, they bought it with a mortgage. So their down payment, let's just say they put 5% down, was only 7,500 bucks, but that 7,500 became $3 million. Where do you find those kind of returns? Not in the stock market, right? Now you might argue saying, well, if I put 150,000 in the stock market, maybe it'd be worth 3 million after 30 plus years. Maybe, maybe not. By the way, speaking of the stock market, it is overvalued by more than double of where it should be right now. If you look at the Buffett indicator, if you ever look that
Mm.
up online,
Yeah.
the Buffett indicator shows that the stock market is now more than 200% above the actual valuation of the market. It has been so overinflated for so long, especially post COVID, post 2020. It's just ridiculous. Even to the point where even now, like as of July 2025, good news comes out, the market barely moves up. That's when you know there's a problem. Like if it has so much downward force that it has to have good news, like, oh, tariffs went lower for China. This is good. They're negotiating, right? And it goes up like, fraction of a percent. That used to be big news. Now nobody gives a crap. Even when
Yeah,
good
because they
news
don't
comes
believe they
out.
everybody's pressing X to doubt on everything when it comes to the stock market right now. And
Yeah.
for those of people who are like, yeah, but look at what he was saying. People got a property, they held on to it. Now everything's being bought up by these foreign companies, and BlackRock and Vanguard own everything. That's just actually not true. There are people that are, unfortunately passing away, and their kids don't take their property. And you have
Mhm.
those. You have people who move. You have people who do things in their life. There's always going to be fluidity in that market, and you can
That's right.
find a good market. And not everybody has to have 15,000 different properties. For most people, just a couple of properties at a decent rate that living people can afford, workers can afford to be in, that think about it ethically, responsibly, and morally. That is enough to change your life. And to change the lives of the other people, because now they have a place to stay. So again, there are very good ways to do this. So besides real estate, do you think there are other like really great alternative investments?
Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, you have to be very, very picky depending on where you're looking. So, for example, put rentals out of your mind for a second, right? Because
Mhm.
I would say in today's market, rentals aren't very good. Even if you're looking out in the East, rentals are
Mhm.
still pretty tough to create enough cash flow because of where the mortgage rates are right now.
Mhm.
Not saying it's a bad investment, but definitely not like when I would buy a rental and I'd make over a 12%, 13% cash on cash return, meaning that, compared to my down payment, I'm making 13% a year. And that doesn't include appreciation, doesn't include they're paying down my mortgage, tax benefits, none of that. That's just not the case anymore. That's not the market we're in now. But I can lend my money to investors, right? I can lend my money. It could be private equity or it could be also still in real estate, lending my money, making 10 or 12% a year, letting me be the bank to those investors because with what happened with the interest rates, they are higher. More and more investors are saying, I don't want to have to deal with the banks right now because I have to jump through all these hoops and red tape just to get a loan that's going to be not much less than if I paid you at 10 or 12%. And so I'm seeing this being great for the last 3 years, as doing
Really?
lending.
See, I find that interesting. That is different than, so that's good. Because I know
Yeah.
that one thing that was really big, now this was years ago, was storage. People were investing with
Mm,
investors into storage facilities because they were not losing their stuff. They were keeping their storage and
mhm.
downsizing the house, which was topsy-turvy. How's storage doing right now, if you know? Because
Not very good.
really,
Storage,
so
the
it's tough.
prices are really high. So
Uh-huh.
getting into self storage now, if you're already in it, that's another story. But
Uh-huh.
if you're trying to get into self storage, not the best. You have to be very, very selective, and
Mm-hmm.
there's been a lot of risk there. Just like what we saw in the last 3 years with multifamily, with apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Apartments got kicked in the teeth the last 3 years because the interest rates went up so high so fast. Remember, an apartment building doesn't have value like your house does. Your
Right.
house has value based on what somebody's willing to pay for it. But when it comes to apartment buildings, and same with self storage, it's all based on how much profit you make. It's a business, it has a business valuation. So when we saw interest rates go so high so fast, the valuations couldn't adjust to it. And we saw apartment complexes, people that had 20% equity lose all of the equity and then some. The market dropped like 30% for a lot of areas,
Really? Oh,
even
that's
though they
interesting.
didn't have any less rent, nothing changed. But just because the market changed, the value of their apartment building dropped by 25 to 30%. And so I saw a lot of people lose a lot of money, especially people that were equity investors going
Hmm.
into these apartment deals, lose money because they couldn't refinance. They got all of a sudden they had a variable rate mortgage that all of a sudden reset. Now it's eating up all their profits and they were in trouble.
Those
Self storage,
variable
similar,
rates are crazy.
very
Yeah, yeah,
similar.
yeah. So what would you say today from what you're forecasting would are you talking to your clients about today? Because you have to really keep your finger on the pulse. Because like as you said, what was good, 3 or 4 years ago, which the older you get, 3 or 4 years ago is like yesterday.
Hmm.
That's like, what? How did that time even go by, right? But it changes, right? So, what do you think for today? If you look today, what would you be advising people, or what are you looking at the most?
Well, definitely diversification is a big one. I'm preaching a lot more lately because it's not bad to have some rentals, but I would diversify into other areas too, like lending. I already mentioned lending before. The one thing that's nice about lending is that if the investor doesn't pay you, assuming that you have the note, right? Just like the bank does when you have a mortgage with the bank, what happens when you stop making your mortgage payment?
Oh, you
The
get
bank
foreclosed on.
forecloses, right?
Yeah.
They take it. You could do the same thing. If you have enough equity, you might say, well, fine, if you're not going to pay me, I'm going to get all my money back and then somebody's selling this property off, right? Basically foreclosing on the investor. So that's definitely one that's been working well. Another one that people are looking at, industrial, your typical ugly warehouses, right? The warehouses that, yeah, it could be Amazon, be in those warehouses, but it might just be simple industrial complexes or even just commercial companies that are storing stuff in these places. Industrial has never actually got hurt by the last few years, even though most of the commercial real estate got hurt. We've also been talking about, there's car wash businesses or whatnot, but again, I wonder if we're going to move into a situation where inflation and or a recession could actually cripple a business a little bit more. So I'm telling people to be very cautious of anything that's business franchise oriented right now. I'll tell you, for me personally, in addition to lending, raw land has been great. Where I have a raw land partnership, I'm not actively doing it because I would never want to do that much work. But having a partnership where I have people buying and selling raw land, they buy it wholesale, sell it at retail, and then they sell it on terms at an interest rate, almost like doing a mortgage for 5, 10, 15 years. for those people buying the property. And so I'm making at least 2.5, 3 times the amount of money that we bought it for on the sale of those properties. And I'm able to get paid, good passive income because they're making monthly payments to us. Give you an example, I've invested a little over $500,000 in our partnership. And right now we're about $13,000 a month coming in from that. So definitely there's a lot of opportunity. But again, I never want people just to park it in one place. It's always better just to have it in different spots. I mean, even oil and gas, that's another one that's still okay, although it's not amazing, but it's paying consistently right now, despite the low oil prices. Now, if those prices come up, we start seeing oil prices coming up, you definitely might make a lot more profits on having, any kind of thing with oil and gas and the mineral rights that you might have on those properties.
Man, there's just so much to think about when you think about being an anti-financial advisor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So guys, we've been talking with Chris Miles, and he is with Money Ripples. And Chris, let everyone know how they can reach you.
Yeah, you mentioned it, Money Ripples, whether it's at Money Ripples on social media, moneyripples.com, or even our Money Ripples podcast that we have on Apple, Spotify, or even on YouTube.
Okay, you're an incredible font of knowledge. There is just so much more we could talk to you about. In fact, Chris knows about infinite banking. We didn't even get into that. We'll probably bring him back on the show. But guys, thank you for being with us today at Super Clinic Project Podcast. You just need to go to superclinicproject.com. We're on every listing platform. And please like, follow, and share. And if I can entreat you to give us a 5-star review, that's what helps us get world-class top people like Chris with Money Ripples on the show. Thank you again, Chris, and everybody. You have a very wonderful Super Clinic week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Super Clinic Project podcast. If you like what you hear, subscribe and stay tuned for further episodes of the Super Clinic Project podcast.